The last ride, the sun hung low over the horizon, casting long shadows across the truck stop parking lot. Hank Walker, a grizzled Marine Corps veteran, leaned against his old but well-maintained Ford F-150, sipping on a lukewarm cup of coffee. His worn leather jacket bore the patches of his past, memories of battles fought overseas, of men lost, and of a life that hardened him into something more than just an ordinary man. He was just passing through, on his way to visit his granddaughter for her birthday. The open road was his sanctuary, and he had no interest in trouble. But trouble had a way of finding him. A group of bikers rumbled into the lot, their Harleys growling like hungry wolves. They were the Iron Fangs, a notorious outlaw motorcycle gang that thrived on intimidation and violence. Their leader, a towering brute named Rex, spotted Hank's truck parked near the pumps. "Nice ride, old man," Rex sneered as he strutted over, his gang fanning out behind him like a pack of jackals. "But I think you're parked in our spot." Hank took another sip of his coffee, unfazed. He had dealt with men like Rex before, bullies who mistook kindness for weakness. "Didn't see your name on it," Hank replied coolly. The gang laughed, but Rex's grin faded. He wasn't used to being talked back to. "You got a smart mouth, Pops," Rex growled, stepping closer. "Maybe we ought to teach you some manners." The gang moved in, forming a semicircle around Hank. The truck stop was mostly empty, just a sleepy cashier inside and a couple of truckers minding their own business. Hank sighed and set his coffee down on the hood of his truck. He stretched his neck from side to side, feeling the familiar tightness in his muscles. "I fought men twice your size," Hank said, his voice steady. "In places 10 times worse than this parking lot. But if you boys want to dance, I won't stop you." Rex chuckled. "You hear that, boys? Grandpa thinks he's a tough guy." The first biker lunged. It was a mistake. Hank stepped aside, his foot sweeping out in a blur, tripping the man and sending him sprawling onto the pavement. Before the others could react, Hank grabbed another biker's wrist and twisted hard. A sickening pop echoed as the man howled in pain. Rex pulled a knife, but Hank was faster. He caught Rex's wrist mid-swing and drove a brutal elbow into his face. Blood sprayed as Rex staggered back, dazed. "Still think I'm a grandpa?" Hank muttered. The remaining bikers hesitated. The element of fear had shifted. They had expected an easy victim, not a war-hardened veteran who moved like a predator. Rex, holding his bleeding nose, spat on the ground. "You got lucky, old man." "Luck had nothing to do with it," Hank said. "Now get on your bikes and ride before I decide to stop being nice." The gang exchanged glances before making the smart choice. They climbed onto their Harleys and roared out of the lot, tails tucked between their legs. Hank sighed, picked up his coffee, and took a sip. It was still warm. Shaking his head, he climbed into his truck and turned the key. "Kids these days," he muttered, driving off into the sunset. Hank drove for about an hour, the highway stretching endlessly ahead. He kept an eye on his rearview mirror. He had dealt with men like Rex before, and they didn't take humiliation lightly. Sure enough, as the road curved into a more desolate stretch of desert, the low growl of motorcycles filled the air behind him. He exhaled sharply. They were back. 5 bikes, their headlights glaring in the fading sunlight, tailed him like hungry wolves. Rex was leading the pack, his nose bandaged, his eyes burning with vengeance. "Guess they didn't learn their lesson," Hank muttered. The road was empty, the nearest town at least 30 miles away. It was just Hank, his truck, and a gang of bikers who had clearly bitten off more than they could chew. The lead biker, one of Rex's goons, sped up alongside Hank's truck and threw something, a chain, which wrapped around Hank's side mirror. "Wrong move," Hank growled, gripping the wheel tight. With a sharp jerk, he swerved, yanking the biker off balance. The man tumbled off his bike and rolled across the pavement. His motorcycle skidded into a ditch, smoking. The remaining bikers gunned their engines, pulling up on either side of Hank's truck. One of them brandished a tire iron, swinging at the passenger side window. Crack! The glass spiderwebbed, but didn't break. Hank's hands tightened on the wheel. "All right, boys," he muttered. "Let's see how you handle an old-school fight." He slammed the brakes. The sudden stop sent 2 bikers flying forward. One crashed into the tailgate, flipping over and landing hard on the asphalt. The other lost control and veered off the road, tumbling into the desert dust. Now only 2 remained, Rex and his right-hand man. Rex howled in rage. "You son of a—" Hank floored it. His truck roared as it surged forward, dust and gravel kicking up behind him. Rex and his last remaining biker gave chase. Then Hank spotted what he was looking for, an old service road leading into the hills. He jerked the wheel and veered off the highway. The dirt road was rough, uneven, but Hank had driven in worse conditions in war zones. He knew these two bikers wouldn't be able to keep up for long. The remaining biker tried, but his front wheel caught a deep pothole. His Harley bucked violently, throwing him over the handlebars like a rag doll. He hit the ground hard and didn't move. Now it was just Rex. The gang leader pulled up beside Hank, his bike rattling from the rough terrain. He pulled a pistol from his vest, aiming straight at Hank. "You're dead, old man." But Hank had already anticipated it. Before Rex could pull the trigger, Hank yanked the emergency brake and spun the wheel. The truck fishtailed violently, its steel frame smashing into Rex's bike. The impact sent Rex flying. His gun went off, bang, but the shot went wide. Rex crashed onto the rocky ground, rolling several times before coming to a stop. His bike flipped end over end, landing in a twisted heap of metal. Silence settled over the desert. Hank stepped out of his truck, walking over to where Rex lay groaning. The gang leader's face was battered, his jacket torn, his body broken. "You should have left it at the truck stop," Hank said, looking down at him. Rex coughed, spitting out blood. His eyes, once filled with arrogance, now held only fear. You ain't gonna kill me, are you?" he wheezed. Hank crouched down, staring him dead in the eyes. "If I wanted you dead," he said coldly, "you'd already be in a body bag." He stood up and walked back to his truck. He had places to be. As he drove off, he glanced in the mirror one last time. Rex was still lying there, broken, defeated. Some men never learn. But Hank Walker wasn't just some man. He was a Marine, and he had one. Hank kept driving, his hands steady on the wheel, but his mind was still sharp, scanning the desert horizon. He knew Rex was finished, at least for now. But the Iron Fangs? They weren't the kind of gang to just walk away. He had embarrassed them. And in their world, that meant only one thing: they'd be back. A new threat by the time Hank rolled into the small town of Red Rock. Night had settled over the desert. He pulled into a quiet motel, the kind that had flickering neon signs and a front desk clerk half asleep behind the counter. He paid cash for a room, old habits, and parked his truck where he could see it from the window. His instincts weren't just paranoia. He had learned the hard way, in war zones and back alleys, that if you let your guard down, you wouldn't live long enough to regret it. And sure enough, as he sat on the edge of the bed, sipping from a bottle of whiskey he kept in his glove box, his phone vibrated. An unknown number. Hank sighed. He let it ring twice before answering. "Yeah." A low chuckle came through the speaker. "Walker, right? The Marine who stomped my boys at the truck stop?" Hank didn't respond. He just listened. "You made a real mess back there," the voice continued. "And now, you've got a bigger problem." "That's so." Hank took a slow sip of whiskey. "You hurt Rex," the voice said, the amusement fading. "And that means you've hurt me." Hank's eyes narrowed. He knew that tone. It was the voice of someone who thought they were the biggest predator in the room. "Who am I talking to?" Hank asked, already knowing the answer. "The name's Viper," the man said. "And the Iron Fangs? They belong to me." The storm rolls and Hank exhaled through his nose, setting the bottle down on the nightstand. "So, Viper," he said, "what happens now?" The man on the phone chuckled again, but this time there was no humor in it. "Oh, it's real simple, old man. You either come find me, or I find you. And trust me, you won't like the second option." Hank's jaw tightened. He glanced at the revolver he had laid next to his wallet. His gut told him Viper wasn't bluffing. "Where?" Hank asked. A pause. "Abandoned gas station. 10 miles north of town. Midnight." The line went dead. Hank sat there for a moment, staring at the phone, before slipping his revolver into his shoulder holster. He had one rule: never let the enemy choose the battlefield. If Viper wanted a war, Hank was damn well going to bring it to him. The showdown at 11:30 p.m., Hank rolled up to the abandoned gas station, parking his truck a good distance away. He climbed out, the weight of his revolver comforting against his ribs. The air was still, but he could feel the tension, thick as oil. The gas station was barely standing, windows shattered, graffiti covering the walls, the neon sign flickering in broken letters. And waiting in front of it were 7 men. Rex was there, bandaged up and looking worse for wear. But next to him was a man Hank hadn't seen before. Tall, muscular, dressed in black leather, with tattoos snaking up his arms. And when he turned to face Hank, his eyes were cold and calculating. "Viper, you actually showed up," Viper said, smirking. "That's real brave." Hank stopped a few feet away, his hands relaxed at his sides. "Let's cut the small talk," Hank said. "You want payback, don't you?" Viper chuckled. "Nah, I don't care about Rex getting his ass kicked. That's his problem." He pulled a switchblade from his pocket, flipping it open and shut. "But me? I just don't like being disrespected." The gang fanned out, surrounding Hank. 7 against 1. Hank had seen worse odds. "You should have brought more men," Hank said. Viper grinned. "You should have brought a coffin." And then the fight began. The veteran versus the outlaws. The first biker lunged. Hank sidestepped and cracked him in the jaw with a brutal right hook. The man crumpled instantly. Another swung a crowbar. Hank ducked, grabbing his arm and twisting hard. A scream tore through the night as the bone snapped. Rex came next, roaring with fury, but Hank was done playing games. He dodged the punch, stepped inside his guard, and drove his knee into the thug's ribs. Rex collapsed, gasping for air. Now, it was just Viper. The gang leader flicked his knife once before lunging. He was fast, but Hank had been fighting men like him his whole life. The blade slashed through the air. Hank dodged left. Another swing. Hank caught Viper's wrist, twisting it violently. Viper hissed in pain, but he didn't go down easy. He yanked himself free and swung again. This time, Hank stepped in close, blocking the knife hand and delivering a savage headbutt. Viper staggered. That was all the opening Hank needed. One punch. Straight to the throat. Viper choked, dropping the knife, gasping for breath. He fell to his knees, clutching his neck. Hank stood over him, breathing evenly. "You lost," Hank said. The remaining bikers, those still standing, backed away. They knew the fight was over. Hank knelt, gripping Viper's collar. "Next time you send men after me, make sure they don't come back." Then he let go, stepping over the groaning bodies as he walked back to his truck. As he drove away, he glanced in the mirror. The Iron Fangs had learned their lesson. And if they hadn't, Hank would be waiting.